A map, by definition, is less than the territory to which it points. If such a topographical depiction were exactly the same in detail, size, and description to the area it wished to cover, then it would be superfluous and redundant. Therefore, if we accept this definition of maps, we know that each of them, no matter how sophisticated, will have gaps, which is another way of saying, perhaps less politely, that all models are in some sense wrong. They will have key pieces and vital information missing. So, like the recorded warning to oncoming passengers in the underground tube stations in London, England, we are told to mind the gaps. In my critical thinking and philosophy classes, on the first day, we make the argument that all academic subjects, from mathematics to sociology, are, to some measure, incomplete, including the professors lecturing on them, because each have their own limitations. In mathematics, for instance, Kurt Friedrich Gödel, at the young age of 25, published 2 incompleteness theorems that demonstrated the limits of provability in formal axiomatic theories, and that a formal system cannot prove that the system itself is consistent. This sentence is false. If A is true, then this statement is false, is true. Therefore, A must be false. Either way, A is both true and false, which is a paradox. He appended Bertrand Russell's and Alfred North Whitehead's magisterial 3-volume attempt in Principia Mathematica 1910, 1912, 1913 to describe a set of axioms and inference rules in symbolic logic from which all mathematical truths could in principle be proven. Yes, even math has gaps. In 1927, Werner Karl Heisenberg introduced the uncertainty principle in quantum mechanics, which showed there was a fundamental limit in physics in knowing precisely the position and momentum of any elementary particle. This caused Albert Einstein endless headaches, no doubt, since, as he informed his good friend Max Born, Heisenberg's mentor and collaborator and grandfather to Olivia Newton-John, the famous pop singer of the 1970s and 1980s, whose signature song was coincidentally entitled "Let's Get Physical," that he didn't believe that the ultimate laws of nature were due to probability. Yet, as repeated experiments have shown over the past century, we cannot yet bypass the uncertainty restriction, since chance is indeed at the heart of quantum theory. In the 1850s, Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace provided us with a tremendous insight into how biological forms evolve and adapt over time due to natural selection. One of the great consequences of their pioneering work was the realization that much of what drives human beings and other animals is the result of previous trials and errors of our ancestors trying to do their best to survive long enough to pass on their genetic codes. Because of this winnowing process, which, lest we forget, is predicated on being able to navigate and acclimatize to ever-changing eco-niches, only certain DNA strands were able to make it through evolution's unpredictable maze. We are the living historical result, and as such have been shaped and molded by a series of untold journeys. Hence, we are limited creatures not only by circumstance, where and when we are born, but by the very nature of our hardware. Given this diversity, some have differing cognitive abilities, some have varying physical impairments, and the list goes on. In some, we are limited creatures by the very nature of our biology. Perhaps a good way to see this clearly is to imagine that we are squirrels who have the newfound ability to talk about our condition, but with the necessary caveat that we must do so within the limitations of our cranial capacities and our central nervous system. would anything we thought or said tell us about the universe as it really is? Or would all our speech be more reflective of how bounded we are by our circumscribed anatomies? In psychology, we're informed that humans on average have the ability to only hold 4 to 7 things in their mind at one time. Given this parameter, is it not the height of hubris to believe, even for a nanosecond, that our mind models of the cosmos and all that it contains are transparently accurate? To the contrary, perhaps the greatest error we make as humans, what some have termed as the original sin of humankind, is to confuse our neurology with ontology. Our brain states tell us much, but in comparison to the totality of the multiverse that surrounds and inhabits us, it is but a quantum drop in an almost infinite sea of possibilities. Socrates. The truth is, O men of Athens, that God only is wise, and in this oracle he means to say that the wisdom of men is little or nothing. He is not speaking of Socrates. He is only using my name as an illustration, as if he said, "He, O men, is the wisest who, like Socrates, knows that his wisdom is in truth worth nothing." Nicholas of Cusa, in his deeply insightful book De Docta Ignorantia, written in the 15th century CE and beautifully translated from the Latin into English in 1981 by Jasper Hopkins under the title On Learned Ignorance, explains that anything which is finite cannot in itself grasp that which is infinite. Using the analogy of comparing a polygon to a circle, Nicholas of Cusa argues that no matter how much we augment the polygon, it will not, by definition cannot, become the totality of the circle unless it changes and becomes it. Nicholas of Cusa. Perhaps for this reason Pythagoras deemed all things to be constituted and understood through the power of numbers. Both the precise combinations in corporeal things and the congruent relating of known to unknown surpass human reason to such an extent that Socrates seemed to himself to know nothing except that he did not know. And the very wise Solomon maintained that all things are difficult and inexplainable in words. As Nicholas of Cusa brilliantly explains, therefore every inquiry proceeds by means of a comparative relation, whether an easy or a difficult one. Hence, the infinite qua infinite is unknown, for it escapes all comparative relation. We are nevertheless virtual simulators, since it is the one great advantage we have over other species, even if our modeling projections will always be limited in their import. As I have argued in a number of essays on Integral World and elsewhere, insourcing varying trajectories in our own Sherlock Holmes-like mind palaces before outsourcing them in a treacherous world where eat or be eaten is endemic has tremendous evolutionary benefits, not the least of which is having more options in a world of feeding, fleeting, fighting, and fucking. Yet this same asset also contains within it a dangerous downside where we far too often confuse our imaginations with how things really are. We need look no further than to the plethora of religions that abound to see that one person's key to heaven is another person's ticket to hell. The problem is that it is difficult to acknowledge our limitations and be open at each and every turn for necessary corrections to our predisposed world outlooks. Instead, we tend to believe that whatever we see, hear, touch, taste, and smell is the sum total of the world, and because of this, we mistake our infinitesimally small slice of reality for reality itself. Lao Tzu. Those who know don't talk. Those who talk don't know. Close your mouth. Block off your senses. Blunt your sharpness. Untie your knots. Soften your glare. Settle your dust. This is the primal identity. Be like the Tao. It can't be approached or withdrawn from, benefited or harmed, honored or brought into disgrace. It gives itself up continually. That is why it endures. The electromagnetic spectrum, which includes a wide array of possibilities, ranging from cosmic rays to gamma rays to ultraviolet rays to infrared microwaves to radar to radio waves to broadband waves, almost entirely escapes our direct perception. It is roughly estimated that we access less than 0.0035% of the total electromagnetic spectrum. We are mostly blind creatures, acting as if we are fully sighted. Take, for instance, the total number of books that have been written in modern history, whether in Gujarati, English, Mandarin Chinese, Spanish, German, French or Hindi, and Google estimates it to be roughly around 130 million. If this is even relatively accurate, it means that no matter how much we read, over 99.9% of all the written texts around the globe would remain unread. Even if we are avid bibliophiles, we cannot even begin to scratch the surface when it comes to the human library. Although we possess the most complex physical virtual reality headset known to exist, our 3 pounds of glorious tissue known as our brain, it remains but a jerry-rigged, filtering data mechanism that conceals much more than it reveals about what surrounds and inhabits us moment to moment. With 86 billion neurons and trillions of synaptic connections, we no doubt get a glimpse of the cosmos, but it is mere a shadowy peephole of the cosmic cinema that is projected to us. What then are we to make of our cranial limitations? The answer is perhaps simpler yet more profound than we may at first appreciate. Focus on our unknowingness and make that, not illusions of all-knowingness, as the foundation of how we approach the universe without and within. Ancient philosophers such as Socrates and Lao Tzu realized this dictum, as have scientists in the modern era, such as the physicist Richard Feynman. There is a wonderful bliss that is available to us if we can feel the mystery of our own being and how very little we know about the how, why, and wherefore of existence. Richard Feynman. But I don't have to know an answer. I don't feel frightened by not knowing things, by being lost in a mysterious universe without any purpose, which is the way it really is, so far as I can tell. It doesn't frighten me. Yes, certainly, there is much we can ascertain, and much that is valuable in our pursuit of knowledge, but even here we should remind ourselves, almost mantra-like, that our ideas are always open to revision. We far too often latch on to dogmatic thinking in hopes of finding certainty and security in all that remains beyond our control. But as science, that most humble of enterprises, has shown us, we can always be wrong in our purviews and thus should remain tentative in assuming any idea or positional attitude as absolute. Uncertainty is a virtue if it allows us to keep open to new information and not fasten ourselves to one purview only, since we are afraid to change. Revising when new data arises is key. Contemplating on our ignorance is what Nicholas of Cusa advised centuries ago, because knowing our limits is the elemental to our enlightenment. By doing such, we can then escape from delusions of grandeur and keep open to learning more, not less, in the process. We are an unknowing creature at every stage of our lives, even if we can articulate our ignorance better as we age. Feel the bliss of this infinite ignorance, and it gives a joy that has no bounds, since one wakes up to the very mystery of being and the sheer wonder of all that precedes and exceeds our capacity to grasp it as it is. Xenophanes of Colophon. No human being will ever know the truth, for even if they happened to say it by chance, they would not even know they had done so. We felt this as little children when we first came out of the womb and felt the magic touch of our mother, the sights and sounds of people and animals, and all sorts of unexpected happenings. But as we grew up, we mistakenly duped ourselves into believing that knowing the name of something meant that we fully understood it. This, of course, is sheer nonsense. Any object and any subject, including ourselves, is unknowable to us in its totality. We have never fully comprehended the simplest of objects, since every material structure has component parts we cannot grasp. We may see a tree in the distance, but we don't see its molecular roots or the atomic lattice that coheres it together. Richard Feynman, the well-respected physicist and professor at California Institute of Technology, described a great teaching lesson from his father when he was quite young.
We were playing in a field, and the kid said to me, "Say, what's that bird? What's the name of it? Do you know the name of that bird?" I says, "I haven't the slightest idea." He said, "Well, it's a brown-throated thrush." He says, "Your father doesn't teach you anything." But my father had already taught me about the names of birds. Once we walked and he says, "That's a brown-throated thrush." He says, "Know what the name of that bird is? A brown-throated thrush." In German, it's called a Flügelflögel. In Chinese, it's called a Tinglongtong. In Japanese, a Tohatahara, and so on. And when you know all the names in every language of that bird, you know nothing, but absolutely nothing about the bird. And then we would go on and talk about the pecking and the feathers. So I had learned already that names don't constitute knowledge. If knowing the name of something. That's caused me a certain trouble since, because I refuse to learn the name of anything. So when someone comes in and says, "You got any explanation for the Fitz-Cronin experiment?" I says, what's that? He says, "You know, that the long-lived K meson disintegrates into 2 pies. Oh, yes, now I know. But I never know the names of things. What he forgot to tell me was that knowing the names of things is useful if you want to talk to somebody else. So you tell them what you're talking about.
But the basic principle of knowing about something rather than just knowing its name is something that you stuck to, is it?
Yes, of course. You have to learn. These are kind of disciplines in the field of science that you have to learn. That to know when you know and when you don't know, and what it is you know and what it is you don't know. And it's you got to be very careful not to confuse yourself.